Hello, I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York. If you had been born around the corner from Ebbets Field and were not made of asbestos, you would have caught baseball fever. My guest today definitely was not made of asbestos. Seth Abraham has loved baseball since he was in knee pants. He traded those later for a suit and a job as a special assistant to baseball's commissioner, and that was just one stop in a glittering career as a sports executive. Seth also built HBO Sports into a powerhouse, and he ran Madison Square Garden. Seth Abraham on A Life in Sports, next. This is going to be fun. Seth Abraham, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tony. It's going to be fun for me, too.
Good. People, I guess we should start just by explaining, people are going to see under your name the word Starship, S.A., LLC, and we ought to tell them what that is.
I've never worked for myself. From the time I graduated college, I went to jobs where I worked for somebody else. So when I left Madison Square Garden in 2005, I wanted to try just to see if it would work, what it would be like working for myself.
Have your own company.
Starship SA is my own company. It's a sports marketing company. I work primarily with large American corporations that are involved in sports, advising them on television, arena management, sponsorship deals, advertising.
Okay.
So Starship is a sports marketing company.
And the name comes from?
A very good friend of mine, George Lois, who has been on your show, who's been on your show.
Wonderful.
He and I sat down one day at his apartment, and the idea of the Starship is that if you hire me and my company, we can take your business to higher heights. So George and I came up with that.
That's two great minds coming up with a great name.
One and a half.
And you have taken several companies higher. We talked about HBO, we talked about Madison Square Garden, but first I want to talk about baseball. Your first love and apparently still your greatest love as a sport, am I right?
I was born literally around the corner from Ebbets Field. The street still exists called Crown Street, an apartment building. And if you opened up the windows, we were on the 6th floor. If you opened up the windows, you couldn't see the park, but you could hear the park. Oh. And my dad used to take me on the weekends. We'd start when the Dodgers were playing at home. We'd go Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. My dad, too, was a very serious baseball fan and a Dodger fan. So I vividly remember my first Dodger game, June of 1951.
I was going to ask you, what was that like?
I asked my father, I was 4, and I asked my father how early we could go to the ballpark. Now, of course, there was no color television in 1951. Yeah. It was barely television. Batting practice was 10:30. So we went into the park.
Afternoon
it was a
games,
1:10. Yeah. 1:10 first pitch. And they were playing the Phillies. And we got into the park at about 10:40, and the Dodgers came out. And something vivid about that, again, because of no color television, how green the grass was. And several of the Dodger African-American ball players were on the green grass stretching. Jackie Robinson, wow. Campanella, Newcomb, Joe Black. I had never seen African-American men as black as Jackie Robinson. He was ebony. And of course, he's wearing a white Dodger home uniform. So there he is on the field, on the infield, on the grass, with his white Dodger uniform, and I was absolutely smitten. And to this day, baseball is my favorite sport. I'll watch pretty much any game. I'm a Mets fan. I'm a suffering Mets fan.
Like I am.
But I will pretty,
I am.
I will pretty much, if there's a game on television, I'll watch the game. And my wife will say to me, do you have a rooting interest? And a good game. My rooting, if the Mets are not in it, my rooting interest is just a good game.
I wonder, I know you spent time and maybe still are on the board of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. Did you ever share that story with his wife?
Rachel.
Rachel?
Multiple times.
Yeah.
Multiple times. And she did something for me that she was always a heroine of mine, but she did something. Our daughter was in school. She was in junior high school, and they had a school project in the history class. Mm-hmm. And 3 kids to a group were assigned a year. They were just randomly assigned a year. And my daughter, Sari, got 1947. So I called up Rachel, and I said, would you give my daughter and her 2 teammates, classmates, half an hour on the phone? And she said, better, just have your daughter call me. So Sari and her classmates, Rachel was living then in Stamford. I think she still does, but she was living in Stamford. Offices were on 34th Street, actually, the Jackie Robinson Foundation. Rachel brought in scrapbooks, hate letters, original hate letters, newspaper clippings, and she brought them all into her office. So our daughter got a living history lesson of the life that Jackie and Rachel had in 1947 as he goes from Kansas City to Montreal to Brooklyn.
Wow.
And forever indebted, because for our daughter, that really made American history come alive to see this.
Of course.
And to talk to Rachel.
Wow, what an extraordinary experience. Let's talk a little bit more about baseball, my favorite sport, and I am a suffering Mets fan. What do you think? Give me your sense of the state of the game these days.
I think all sports are cyclical. They have ups and downs driven by any number of factors. Heroes, stars, where the successful teams are. Any sport that has successful teams in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston are going to be on an uptick. Any sport. Any sport that does not have successful teams in most of those markets are probably on a downtick. So I would say that baseball is probably, the Yankees are very promising with a new team. The Mets, a new manager with quite an armed pitching staff. So I would say that baseball is probably going to be on an upswing for some time.
I saw a disturbing stat, if you will, the other day. The baseball revenue has cracked $10 billion, the highest that it's ever been. But the last 3 years, attendance has declined, which doesn't bode well, I would think.
Well, what's happened, and again, I don't think it's just baseball, seasons have now been extended. Look at the NBA, how the NBA once ended in April, first week of May. Now, if you have a 7-game final, you're talking about the end of June, which eats into the baseball season. So you have NBA fans who now are staying with their teams through the playoffs, April, May, and June. That affects ticket sales and interest in baseball because the pennant races haven't heated up yet.
Right.
So you're talking April, May, and June, and the pennant races are just beginning to take shape. So that's one thing. Football now, Super Bowl, February. The season extends into February. That eats into the NBA. So I would say that that statistic is a bit misleading, and it's more about total revenue and, I would say, attendance. Those would be the barometers that I would watch generally for any sport, not just baseball.
Well, let's talk as a couple of fans. Critics of baseball, or people who don't like baseball, have always called it slow and boring. And I'm wondering if, and I've never agreed with that, but I'm wondering if part of that description is coming true. The game in the last couple of years has become home runs, strikeouts, and walks, and can be boring. I mean, there's not a lot of action in most of the game. Home runs are exciting, but home runs are nothing else. and walks and strikeouts. That's what the game seems to be. Do you see it that way, or are you?
I do, but I see it from I do, but I see it from a different perspective. I think what is underestimated is the cultural crossroads between sports and culture. I'm talking now in the United States particularly. Sports fans are getting younger. Younger people watch their games differently. They watch them on their phones. They watch them on their mobile devices. They watch them in bits and pieces. They don't necessarily want to watch 9 innings, God forbid, 12, 15 innings, God forbid, a doubleheader. That is not the way young people, even if they're baseball fans, they want to see the highlights, the best catch, the best throw, the home run, the fight. They want to see it in different dosage than we did. That, I think, is a problem for Rob Manfred and people in the sport. How do you make the game go faster without giving up the essence of the game?
Interesting point and question you raised, because pace of play, as they call it, is probably topmost in Rob Manfred's, the commissioner's mind. We've been hearing about this. They want to find ways to speed up the game, presumably to further attract the eyeballs of these young people you're talking about. And I don't know if that's, you make the point that, is that possible without destroying the essence of the
That's
game?
a supreme challenge. That's a supreme challenge for Rob Manfred and people in baseball. You're not going to have a 7-inning game. You're not going to have the mercy rule where if one team is ahead by 10 runs, the game is over. How do you keep the essence of the game? Tony, I don't know the answer to this.
Pitch clock? I mean, that's one.
How many, I don't know the answer, but I wonder how many complete games were thrown by pitchers in both leagues last season.
Not many.
I would say less than 50. I would say less than 50.
I think that's probably a really good guess.
So that leads to the walkathon of relief pitchers.
Right.
And now you have specialists, one pitch, one batter. So it's a parade of relief pitching. Right?
That's got to change.
It does.
I mean, I've seen games and you've seen games. The manager goes out, talks to the pitcher, he's in trouble, and decides to leave him in. He goes back, gives up a hit, so there's that delay. Now he gives up a hit, so now he comes out again, takes the guy out. New guy comes in, and they all meet on the mound. And first batter comes up, and all of a sudden the catcher wants to talk to the pitcher again. Well, didn't they just, 30 seconds ago, didn't they just talk? I mean, there's a lot of that. And I think there must be a way to change that. I mean, you can't take away a manager's prerogative to bring in a relief pitcher when he wants to, but somehow I got to do this with more efficiency.
Sports is entertainment, which means that the fan consumer has myriad of choices. Movies, television, home video, on demand, internet in capital letters to stay home and just be on the internet. So I think it's all of the major sports. How do you keep the essence of your game, but understand the fan? What does the fan want? I think younger fans want faster games. They want faster games. They have been conditioned to that.
Right.
And I think it will continue. It won't change. Mm-hmm. So I think all of the commissioners and their staffs and their research departments have to say, how do we deal with that? Fans are getting younger. They're not getting older, they're getting younger. So how do we appeal to them?
Yeah, and if they're going to be watching on tablets and phones, as you pointed out, it's a whole different experience.
It is. You can still be a sports fan, but you're enjoying it in a very different fashion.
Let's talk about a place you worked 5 years. You were the president of Madison Square Garden. That place is dysfunctional. I mean, you look at the Knicks, and what was once one of the greatest franchises in the NBA with the Celtics and the Lakers back in those days, 70s, early 70s, has for, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years, been just a miasma. Why? You were there, why?
I don't think there's a single answer. I don't think it's a simple answer. In my mind, you ask about the Knicks. In my mind, the Knicks had the right executive in Donnie Walsh.
One of a parade that came through.
But he was the right man. He was the right man. There's such pressure to win in New York. The fans, the media, who think they know better than anybody else, sponsors, advertisers, ownership of the Garden. Donnie, given time, he's rebuilt Indiana twice in 10 years. Twice, not once, twice. And started from scratch both times.
People probably have forgotten that Donnie Walsh was even there. I mean, you had the Isaiah Thomas.
Sure.
You had Phil Jackson.
Glenn Grunwald.
I mean,
it goes on and on and on. In my view, they had the right man. I think you have to be patient. You have to come in with a plan. And I think Donnie had a plan of how to rebuild the team, and ownership was impatient, pulled the trigger on the Carmelo Anthony deal, traded away the entire bench. In effect, traded away the entire bench. If one thing's changed in the NBA, I think, and I watch a lot of games, the bench now is so important. The game is so physical and so intense. You can't win without 9 players. Not 5, not 6, not 7, not 8. You need 9 players to win a championship.
Well, you talk about you got to have a plan. Does Jim Dolan have a plan? Does he know what he's doing?
I think as an owner, Jim's plan is, I want this, I want that. And like many owners, impatient for results. You don't rebuild any team in any sport in 2 or 3 seasons. You have to have a plan that you believe in and stick with it. But Jim reads the newspapers. He sees the reaction in the Garden when fans boo. He hears it from sponsors. He hears it from advertisers. So he's impatient. He is passionate about the Garden. He's passionate about the Knicks. Absolutely, he's passionate about them. He wants to win. But Mark Cuban, who is every much the zealot that Jim is patient. He realizes his team needs to be rebuilt.
The Dallas
Mavericks. He understands that. He's not firing his coach. He's not firing his front office. He's concentrating on what's the plan. What's the plan? Is it free agents? Is it trades? Is it draft picks? Is it international players that we import from Europe? How do we rebuild? Jim doesn't generally have the patience for that. So what does he do? He fires his general managers and presidents searching for the Holy Grail. I don't think in sports there is a Holy Grail.
You wonder if we're just, talking in a vacuum here, because as bad and dysfunctional as the Knicks are and have been, and the Rangers aren't doing much either, the Garden, the seats are sold. I mean, people, would I be exaggerating it too much? I mean, you ran the place. To say that it's like the business is impervious to a certain extent to what's going on the courts.
Many, many years ago, Red Smith, the very famous journalist, Herald Tribune, New York Times, wrote a book. I don't know if he put it in a column, but he wrote it in a book that I read. He said the most famous building ever built by man was the Roman Colosseum, a sports arena.
Right.
I would say that today, the most famous building, or well-known, if not famous, well-known building in the world is Madison Square Garden.
Well, they
Garden,
call themselves, what is it?
world's
World's
most
most famous
arena. It has, having worked there for 5 years, it really has an energy of itself. The people who perform there, not just the athletes, the musical acts. I've had conversations with Elton John. There is no place in the world he would rather play than Madison Square Garden, anywhere in the world. Billy Joel said the same thing to me. No place in the world would he rather perform than Madison Square Garden. So the building has its own energy. That's a good thing, and it probably inspires the fans to keep coming, even though the Knicks have had 4 50-loss seasons in a row, probably on their way to a 5th 50-loss season now. The Rangers are out of the playoff hunt, and yet the seats are sold, and the fans go. Even if they go to boo, they go.
They go. So Seth, can I reduce all this to the vernacular and say Jimmy Dolan, as hard as he tries to screw things up, they're still going to make money?
Yes. Simple answer, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Sponsors want to be in a building with fans that have that kind of energy. And it's a good energy. Even when fans boo, they are surely involved. They are surely knowledgeable. So yes, it will continue to make money.
I want to ask you about the U.S. Olympic Committee. How is this organization still, how are those people still at their jobs after what they have done and didn't do in the Dr. Larry Nassar crisis?
So this is just one person's view. It's not biblical. I believe there are certain jobs, there are certain institutions where you must have a zero tolerance philosophy. Not one mistake, no mistake. And if you make one mistake in my philosophy, you're gone. You're gone.
You're
gone.
You've got a glittering,
You're gone.
45-year career
in my view, there are certain institutions like the United States Olympic Committee.
So how are those people still there? I mean, the guy has gone to
club.
jail.
It's a club. It's a club. As many of these leagues are, it's a club.
A club that turns its eyes, averts its eyes from abuse of teenage girls?
I'm not defending them at all. It's heinous. It's absolutely heinous. Me, if I had that authority, I'd get rid of them all. Start over again.
And the gymnastic,
I'd start over.
U.S. Gymnastics.
I'd start over again. That's what I would do. I would completely rebuild the USOC. I read an article in the New York Times in the last week where the chairman of the USOC was praising the committee. They did the right thing. They responded quickly. And I'm thinking, what? What did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch?
250, is it, young women?
They were praising the USOC for the way they handled it. Not they, one man, but he's the chairman of the United States Olympic Committee. And I'm thinking, wow. Now, but Tony, you have to remember something. You go back to the USOC and the IOC. This is the group that banned Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller from running.
Yeah.
So Avery Brundage didn't want Jews on the team because it would offend the German hosts. So there is quite a history here of the club. That's the way I think of it. One of the things that I did when I was at Madison Square Garden and at HBO, I used to say to myself, how should I hire? How should I hire people? I didn't care where people went to school. I didn't care who they knew. I would finally ask myself, are they clever? Which is different than smart.
Yeah.
Which is different than where you go to school. Are you clever? Can you figure things out? In many of these clubs, they talk to themselves and they can't figure it out.
Echo chamber.
They can't, echo chamber's right. They can't figure it out.
Quick question, Seth, about boxing. I mean, you built it, that powerhouse at HBO to some extent on your foresight and signing
A lot of
kid
thanks,
named
but
Mike
thank
Tyson.
you, but a lot of people were involved.
Does boxing have a future?
No.
Okay, let's move on.
It doesn't have a future for some pretty obvious reasons. Number one, young people, primarily boys, young men, 18 to 34, mixed martial arts, UFC.
Right.
Boxing for them is ancient. Ancient.
It's over.
They're not watching it.
We have about 2.5 minutes. I'm interrupting you because I want to get your take on our two teams, principally the Mets. What do you think? I mean, it's all about hope, isn't it?
Well,
hoping that the guy's arms all...
You know, I watched Mickey Callaway's press conference in Port St. Lucie. I was very impressed the way he talked about the pitching staff, the way he talked about the team. As somebody once wrote of Carl Furillo, these guys are armed. The question is, can they stay healthy?
We're doing this with the
Can they stay healthy?
Yeah. And if they do, playoffs?
In the World Series.
Really?
Don't say they win it, because
No,
I don't know
no.
who'll be on the other side.
No, of course.
In the World Series, if their pitching stays healthy.
And what is the number in thousands of home runs that are going to be hit at Yankee Stadium?
Multiple thousands. Multiple. Balls are going to fly out of there.
I mean, you know, I'm not a Yankee fan, but I'm a Giancarlo Stanton fan.
So am I. So am I.
I can't imagine him in the same lineup with Aaron Judge.
Right.
And I guess the rest of the American League is saying the same thing.
They're going to be fun to watch. They're going to be fun to watch.
A quick question that I wanted to get in earlier. What about this tearing down to, tanking to win? The last three World Series champions essentially did that. The Astros, the Cubs, the Royals. And now we see it in various places, Miami with Derek Jeter. What do you think of that?
I'm actually not upset by it.
Really?
Yeah. I think if you're an owner and you're in management, the goal is sustainable winning. Not just winning one season or having a winning record, but being sustainable. And if it means dumping salaries, dumping players, I think next year, not now, but next year, the 76ers have a chance to be the Eastern Conference finalists.
Because they did.
Because of their process.
Yeah. Well, look, there's so much more we could talk about, and I'd love to, but they're giving me the hook. Seth Abraham, it's a delight to see you.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.